Hello, Whittemore Prescott Elementary. This is Mr. Craner again for another book in our Great Lakes Great Books Bracket Challenge. We had legends the first time matched up against each other, the Legend of Michigan and the Legend of the First Maple Sugar. And later today, at the end of the day, I will be coming on the loudspeaker and announcing the results of that first round competition and what book will move on in our tournament. Today I'm going to be reading a book called A Place Called Home, Michigan's Mill Creek Story. And this is not a legend. This is historical fiction, which is my favorite genre. So fiction means that it's not a true story, but historical fiction means that it is based off of something in our history, an historical event, a historical period of time. And in this case, we're going to get the story of Mill Creek and how Mill Creek came to be. Mill Creek might be familiar to some of you. I know that back when Mrs. Hensley used to take the UP trip in the summer with our students, that's a visit that they would make, Mill Creek up by the Mackinac Bridge. So some of our 4th, 5th, 6th graders may have visited there on that trip, or maybe you've gone on a family vacation and visited, but it is a place that you can go and see still today. In fact, I think some of our 4th graders might be visiting Mill Creek later this spring. So again, today's story, A Place Called Home, Michigan's Mill Creek Story. This is written by Janie Lynn Panagopoulos, who is a Michigan author, and illustrated by Guybert van Frankenhuizen, who was the same illustrator as the Legend of Michigan book that we read a couple of days ago. No, I'll not go. I'll not be crossing the Straits of Mackinac again. Listen to that wind howling. 'Tis a warning, I tell you. Hush, Robert Campbell. You'll be waking the children, said Mama with a whisper. Little Mary and Johnny rubbed sleep from their eyes and pulled back the bearskin blanket from their bed. Quietly, they tiptoed across the loft and peeked down to see their father, mother, and older brother James sitting at the table of their cabin. I made an oath when I first came here from Scotland, said Papa, to never leave this land or cross the open water again. This is our home here. I'll not leave it, nor give that wild water another chance at my life. Robert, Governor Sinclair has ordered everyone to leave Fort Michilimackinac and the old fort village. We must move to the new island settlement, insisted Mama. We have no choice. Little Mary and Johnny listened, their eyes growing wide when they heard that they were to leave their home at Fort Michilimackinac. We Campbells are merchants, not sailors. We have no place there on that island of Mackinac. Drat those American patriots and their revolution. I'll not be leaving my home for the likes of them. I have a plan that will please both Governor Sinclair and King George. A plan that will also keep us upon solid ground and not surrounded by water. Tell us, urged James. Aye, tell us, said Mama. There's land not far from here, once cleared by soldiers for firewood, where maple sugar runs and a fine swift creek flows. Aye, said Mama, we know the place. It's there I'll build a sawmill to cut trees. This will please both the governor and the king, said Robert Campbell proudly. Aye, said James. It's said there's not enough wood on the island of Mackinac to build houses, or to build churches and schools, added Mama. Nor for the buildings of the fort, or cordwood for fireplaces, added Papa. 'Tis a good plan, Robert, said Mama with a smile. Johnny and little Mary were pleased at how clever their father was. Carefully they tiptoed back to bed, their father's voice fading into the howling winter wind. Thick ice soon covered the Straits of Mackinac as the Campbells watched their neighbors, one by one, move to the new island settlement. Teams of horses and oxen wearing spiked shoes pulled large sleds filled with household items across the winter ice. Soon the winter winds grew silent, and splitting sounds of cracking ice gave way to warm spring. Little Mary and Johnny watched as more families packed their feather beds, shutters, and doors into boats that glided swiftly across the open water to the island of Mackinac. Indian families who made their homes in villages outside the old fort soon filled their birch-bark canoes with woven mats and rolls of bark from their lodges and paddled their canoes to their new island homes. Tears ran down little Mary's cheeks as she waved goodbye to her friends. Johnny wondered if he would ever see the bright red coats and fancy hats of the British soldiers, or hear the happy notes of the voyager's fiddle again. Soon old Fort Michilimackinac was empty, and plumes of smoke rose high into the air above Mackinac Island from the fireplaces of the new settlement. Time's a-wastin', called Mama to Mary and Johnny. 'Tis spring, and we have a garden to plant. We'll need lots of food when we move to our new home at Mill Creek. Together, little Mary, Johnny, and Mama worked in the garden, planting corn, cabbage, potatoes, squash, and beans. One evening, Papa came home very happy. Governor Sinclair had finally given him permission to build a sawmill at the creek. Mill Creek, said Papa. That's what we'll call it. Tomorrow we begin to build, he announced proudly as he slapped James on the back. I want to help too, demanded Johnny. James laughed at his little brother. You're too small to help, he said. No, Johnny isn't too small, insisted Papa as he smiled proudly at his youngest son. Johnny can help by looking after things here. There will be lots of work now that there's a cabin and sawmill to build. Johnny can chop firewood and bring water up from the lake for Mama. Johnny's not too small to work like a man. He's a Campbell. Johnny smiled at Papa and then scrunched up his face at his big brother. The next morning, before the sun was even up, Papa and James left, carrying their tools to Mill Creek to begin their work on the new cabin and sawmill. They did this every morning for weeks. In the garden at the old cabin, tiny plants began to grow taller, and the summer days passed quickly. One day, Mama gave little Mary and Johnny some crockery to carry and led them to the old apple orchard. Mama carefully scooped up soil from around the roots of the apple trees and sliced off tender new branches. These apple trees, she said, were brought from across the great waters of the Atlantic Ocean to Mackinac, so mothers could feed their children to keep them healthy and help them grow strong. Let's plant these buds in crocks to take to our new home, where they too will grow strong to feed us. Mama gently sprinkled water from her fingertips over the tiny new trees to help them grow. One evening, Papa and James came home very excited and announced, "The cabin is finished. We have a new home." Everyone was happy. Papa danced around the cabin with Mama in his arms. James rolled up his sleeves, showing off his strong muscles from clearing land for the new cabin and sawmill. Johnny showed his muscles too from chopping firewood and carrying water. The next morning, pots and dishes, feather beds, and boxes of vegetables from the garden were all loaded into the ox cart. The chickens were packed into baskets and cattle brought in from the meadow. Carefully, Mama placed the crocks of young apple trees into the cart. Finally, it was time for them to leave Fort Michilimackinac and the old fort village, too. Following an Indian trail along the lake shore, the oxen slowly pulled the cart on the sandy trail. Their new home at Mill Creek was not far, and soon they could see their new cabin in a sunny clearing in the forest. Together, the family lit the first fire in the cabin's fireplace and prayed for blessing and safekeeping in their new home and the sawmill that was to follow. Before the cows were led to the meadow to graze, James tied bells around their necks. Little Mary scattered grain to welcome the chickens. Mama carried the crocks filled with young apple trees from the ox cart and planted them in the dark, rich earth. One day, soldiers came from the island in their bright red coats and fancy hats. Governor Sinclair had sent them because he needed lumber to build the new island fort. Papa was excited, but there was work to be done before wood could be cut at the new sawmill. The soldiers stayed to help Papa and James. First, they built a dam, like the beavers make, only bigger, to slow the swift-moving creek. With the dam, the water could be controlled. Next, they finished the mill house that held the gears of the sawmill and built a mill wheel. The mill wheel had paddles that would catch the water from the creek and turn the wheel round and round. When the mill wheel turned, gears in the mill house would move, and this would lift a great saw blade up and down to cut the wood. Everyone works very hard to build the sawmill at Mill Creek, the first of its kind near the Straits of Mackinac. Orders were sent to the blacksmith on Mackinac Island to forge a large, sharp blade for the new mill to cut wood. Soon a boat arrived from the island with the shiny new blade. It had many sharp, pointy teeth. Papa, James, and the soldiers carefully fit the blade into place. The sawmill was ready. Next, a door in the dam that blocked the water from flowing was opened, and through the sluice, water came splashing down on its way to the mill. The fast-moving water caught the paddles of the great mill wheel, turning it slowly at first, then faster and faster. Papa lifted a log into a carriage that was moved by the gears. Those gears were moved by the mill wheel, which was powered by the force of the water of Mill Creek. It was now time to release the blade. Suddenly, the mill house began to shake, making loud noises. Little Mary hid behind Mama's skirt, and Johnny covered his ears. The noise stopped, and Papa and James appeared at the door of the mill house, smiling. "She's a fine mill," called Papa. "She's cut her first log." All the soldiers cheered and shouted, "Huzzah!" They threw their fancy hats high into the air. "So that's what a sawmill sounds like," said Mama. "Aye," said Papa. "Each time the blade, lifted by the power of the water, bites into the wood, the mill shakes with the mighty power of the machine. 'Tis wonderful, is it not?" Mama smiled at Papa, but Johnny knew Mama didn't think all that noise was so wonderful. Neither did he. Soon everyone got used to the sound of the noisy mill. Piles of sweet-smelling lumber were carried from Mill Creek to the shore of Lake Huron and loaded aboard boats made into rafts to be floated across the straits on their way to the island fort. My heart is glad to be on solid ground and have a fine new sawmill here at Mill Creek, said Robert Campbell to his family as they stood along the shore and watched their wood make its journey to Mackinac Island. Look, Papa, yelled Johnny, pointing his finger along the shoreline toward the old fort village. Fire! Oh, Robert, the forest is ablaze, cried Mama as little Mary clung to her mama's skirt in fear. No, said James. I heard the soldiers talking. 'Tis Governor Sinclair. He's ordered the old fort burned. The Campbells watched as billows of dark gray smoke filled the sky over the Straits of Mackinac. Many people in canoes and boats from Mackinac Island drew near the shore to say goodbye to the old fort. A voyager played a sad song on his fiddle as he sat in his birch bark canoe on the water. A cannon blast boomed and echoed from the island, giving a final farewell to the once proud fort of Michilimackinac. Robert Campbell lifted little Mary to his shoulders and put his arm around his family, looking toward the island. It'll be a fine new fort and settlement, said James. Mama wiped away tears from her eyes. Aye, and new families will follow in need of schools and churches, she added. And new homes and buildings, said Johnny, built of our wood from Mill Creek.